You've always known there's more to the mind than what you can see. Not in the way we understand neurons or brainwaves, but something older. Something that watches from beneath your thoughts. Something that slips through dreams, symbols, and silence. You were taught that the unconscious is a modern idea, a Freudian invention, or a neurological process. But what if the story began long before psychology had a name? Before science, before language, before reason itself? Because in ancient myths, sacred sleep, and the language of the soul, the unconscious was already there. Not a theory, but a world. A hidden realm we once believed we could enter, navigate, and return from changed. This is the beginning of that story. In the earliest civilizations, the mind wasn't divided into conscious and unconscious. It was porous, open to spirits, gods, dreams, and death. To sleep was to surrender the body and let something else take over. In Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, dreams weren't random. They were messages, prophecies, answers waiting to be interpreted by those who knew how to listen. Dream interpreters were not considered therapists. They were priests, oracles, emissaries of the divine. To them, the mind was not mechanical. It was sacred. Temples were built for dreaming. In Greece, they called it incubation. You would sleep in a sanctuary, awaiting a dream sent by the gods. Not metaphorical gods, real presences that shaped your fate. Asclepius, the god of healing, often sent visions through sleep. You would wake not with a diagnosis, but with a revelation. In Egypt, the soul was never one thing. It was many. The car, your vital force, your life double. The bar, your personality, capable of flight, of visiting places your body could not go. And the Ak, the immortal, luminous spirit, transfigured after death. Even in life, these forces moved between worlds. Your car animated you. Your bar wandered in dreams and death. And your Ach watched from beyond, waiting. To sleep was to let the bar travel. To die was to let the car return to the gods. And if the right rituals were done, you became Ak. You became eternal. The Greeks, too, believed the soul descended underground. Not symbolically, but literally to Hades, to the shadow realm beneath the living world. And there, among the dead, flowed the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. To drink from Lethe was to forget your past life, to be purified of memory, to be made ready for rebirth. What could be more unconscious than that? Dreams were ruled by Hypnos, the god of sleep, and his son Morpheus. Morpheus, whose name means shaper, gave form to your dreams. He was the sculptor of images, the messenger of visions. He didn't speak through logic. He spoke through symbols. Your unconscious wasn't beneath you. It was a place you entered every night, a place where gods still lived. In China, they believed you had two souls, the Hun and the Po, the ethereal and the corporeal, Yang and Yin. Your Hun was the wandering soul, light, airy, it left the body after death. Your Po was heavy, rooted in the body, tied to the physical world. And when you died, the Hun departed to the heavens, while the Po stayed behind, with the flesh. This dualism wasn't philosophical abstraction. It was intimate. It meant your inner life was always split. One part ascending, one part decaying. Even in life, the tension between spirit and body was never resolved. Your unconscious was not a part of the brain. It was a dance between these two forces, a divine imbalance carried in every breath. Hindu philosophy took the idea even further. There were not just two states of mind, but four. waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and Turiya the fourth state. Beyond them all, Jagrat is the waking world, the world you're in now. Swapna is the dreaming mind, the play of illusion and memory. Sushupti is deep sleep, the silent void where even the dreamer vanishes. And Turiya is pure consciousness, not a state you can enter, but a ground beneath all states. It is awareness without thought, being without separation, a mystery your unconscious remembers, even if your waking mind never does. In this view, dreams are not meaningless noise. They are Maya illusion that reveals truth, and if you can see clearly within them, you glimpse the self behind all selves, the one that never sleeps. Indigenous cultures around the world tell similar stories, that the soul travels in dreams, that visions come in trance, that sleep is not absence, it is access. In Native American traditions, dreams are often journeys, not fantasies, but explorations of other worlds. In many African and Australian Aboriginal cosmologies, dreams connect you to ancestors, spirits, and memory beyond your lifetime. They are not hallucinations. They are maps. The shaman does not analyze dreams. The shaman walks through them, navigates them, returns with knowledge. For the unconscious mind was never seen as just inner. It was other, a realm that coexisted with waking life, just beyond the veil. And dreams? Dreams were the key. Across these cultures, one truth repeats. The mind is not just rational, it is mythic. Symbols are not decorations. They are bridges between the seen and unseen, the conscious and unconscious, the river that makes you forget, the double that lives beside you, the soul that flies while the body rests, the God who shapes your dreams. These are not metaphors. They are architectures of the deep mind. Thousands of years before Freud, before Jung, before neuroscience, human beings already knew that part of them lived in the dark, that it spoke in riddles, that it remembered what the waking mind could not, and that, to understand yourself, you had to go underground, to the temples, to the dreams, to the symbols carved into tombs and walls, where the unconscious was not a theory. It was sacred terrain. You didn't invent the unconscious. You inherited it. It's been there since the beginning, sleeping beside you, whispering beneath your breath, watching from behind your eyes. And though the language has changed, the map's rewritten, the myth remains. Because every night, when you close your eyes and drift beyond thought, you return to that ancient place, to the first story, to the hidden mind you never stopped carrying. You might believe your thoughts belong to you, that what rises in your mind is yours to choose, to know, to understand. But something else is moving beneath the surface, something older, stranger, more primitive than thought. It speaks in symbols. It dreams in metaphors. It hides the things you're not ready to remember and shows them to you when you least expect it. You forget a name. You make a joke that cuts too deep. You dream of a hallway that doesn't end. And it all begins here, with the man who gave the unconscious a name, Freud. Sigmund Freud did not discover the unconscious. Ancient minds had already imagined it as gods, souls, and shadows. But Freud turned it into a theory, a structure, a science of the hidden self. He didn't stumble upon it by accident. He listened to dreams, to slips of the tongue, to nervous laughter and haunted silences. He listened not to what people said, but to what they almost said, to what their minds tried to repress, and what leaked through anyway. The conscious mind, he believed, was only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lived everything we've buried, everything we've denied, everything we fear to know about ourselves. He called it the topographical model. Like a map, 3 regions of the mind, layered like sediment. At the top, the conscious, everything you know right now. Your thoughts, your awareness, your decisions. Just below the preconscious, thoughts you can recall if needed. Memories, facts, names you haven't forgotten, just set aside. And beneath it, all the unconscious. A sealed basement, a vault of forbidden desires, fears, painful memories, instincts. A place your conscious mind refuses to visit, but cannot stop being shaped by. It's where your deepest urges live, especially the ones you've learned to disown. Hidden fantasies, anger, guilt, desire so intense it has to be locked away. You think you've forgotten, but your dreams haven't. Your fears haven't. Your body remembers, and it shows. Freud didn't stop with the map. He gave the unconscious its own characters. He called them the id, the ego, and the superego. At the base of your psyche lies the id. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't care about rules. It wants food, pleasure, primal drives, power. Now it's instinctive, relentless. It is driven by the pleasure principle, the hunger to feel good, whatever the cost. It lives in the dark. It never sleeps. Above it floats the ego. This is the you recognize, the voice of reason, the manager trying to keep everything under control. It negotiates with reality, making compromises. It wants to keep the id happy, but it knows society has rules. And then there's the superego, the judge, the voice of morality and guilt. It whispers what you should do, not what you want to do. It's your parents, your culture, your shame internalized and watching. So you are not one mind. You are 3, always in conflict, always at odds. And the unconscious is where that tension leaves its marks. But what happens when these forces collide? When the id demands something forbidden, the ego can't allow it. The superego criticizes it. And that's where defense mechanisms begin. You repress the thought. You push it down into the unconscious. You pretend it was never there. But it doesn't disappear. It distorts. It shows up in other ways. You project your desires onto others. You channel them into art, work, passion. You deny. You displace. You rationalize. Not because you're weak, but because you're protecting yourself from something your conscious mind cannot hold. Freud believed we do this all the time. Not occasionally, but constantly. We live at the edge of an inner battlefield, managing the fallout of thoughts we dare not admit. And the body keeps the secrets. Through anxiety, through obsession, through the way we flinch at certain names, or fall silent at certain moments. The unconscious, he said, never forgets. It just waits for its moment to return. So how do you reach it? How do you speak to something that doesn't use words? Freud believed dreams were the royal road to the unconscious. Not just images, but messages. Not nonsense, but disguise. When you dream, your ego relaxes. It lets the id speak, but the message must still pass the guards of consciousness. So, the desire gets transformed, encrypted into symbols. He called this process dream work. It begins with condensation. Multiple ideas fused into one image. Then displacement, the real meaning, is pushed onto something less threatening. Then symbolization, a wish becomes a metaphor. And what you remember in the morning is the manifest content, the story. But the latent content, the meaning hides beneath. A wolf in the hallway. A broken stair. A key that doesn't fit. These aren't random. They are your unconscious, speaking in code. Freud saw this process unfold in his case studies. Ordinary people, haunted by ordinary lives, but bearing extraordinary dreams. There was little Hans, a 5-year-old boy terrified of horses. On the surface, a phobia. But Freud saw more. He interpreted the fear as displaced anxiety. A symbol of Hans's repressed childhood conflict, the unconscious rivalry with his father. Then there was Dora, a young woman with unexplained symptoms. Freud listened not just to what she said, but what she avoided. Her dreams, her silences, her contradictions. He found unconscious family conflicts, repressed painful experiences that surfaced through her symptoms. And the Wolfman, a patient haunted by a dream of white wolves watching him from a tree. Freud traced it back to childhood terror, a painful memory wrapped in metaphor. And through the dream's strange logic, he found the wound the conscious mind had buried. In each case, the pattern was the same. A symptom, a fear, a dream, and beneath it a wish, a memory, a truth too raw to face directly. Freud believed that analysis could bring these truths to light, not through instruction, but through free association, letting the patient speak whatever came to mind. Through slips of the tongue, Freudian slips where the unconscious leaks through. Through jokes because humor reveals what shame conceals. Psychoanalysis was not about advice. It was about discovery, about following the thread of speech until the repressed came into view. And it was painful, because to uncover the unconscious is to confront yourself. Not who you think you are, but who you've avoided being. The child who wanted something forbidden. The adult still acting out old wounds. The hidden architect of your own suffering. Freud didn't promise healing. He offered clarity, insight, the chance to understand why you do what you do, even when you don't know why. Of course, Freud was controversial. His emphasis on taboo desire, on the childhood conflict, on repression, these ideas were attacked, challenged, misunderstood. But his deeper point remains: you are not fully conscious of yourself. You live with forces you didn't choose, desires you don't understand, and defenses that protect you at a cost. The unconscious, in Freud's view, is not passive. It is dynamic. It resists. It returns. It shapes your life from the shadows. And when you dream, or slip, or break, or fall in love too fast, it is there, whispering its old desires. Writing your story in invisible ink, you think you're in control. But Freud knew control is an illusion. You are the rider. The unconscious is the horse. And the more you deny it, the more it leads you, exactly where you said you'd never go. You thought you were only carrying your own mind. But what if your thoughts weren't just yours? What if something ancient, shared, and universal has always lived inside you, whispering in symbols, repeating in dreams, shaping how you see the world? Freud said the unconscious was personal. Jung said it was collective. You are not just one story. You are the echo of many. Carl Gustav Jung saw what others didn't. He began as Freud's student, absorbed the theories, followed the path. But as he listened to his patients, watched their dreams, studied their myths, he realized something was missing. Too much couldn't be explained by childhood alone. Too many images repeated across cultures. Too many patterns returned again and again, even in people who had never met. a snake, a circle, a wise man in a cave, a dark twin in a mirror. These weren't just fantasies. They were something deeper, something inherited. Jung called it the collective unconscious. Not a memory, not an experience, but a structure, a framework beneath the mind, shared by all humans, passed down from our ancestors. Just as you inherit a body, you inherit a psyche. Not blank, but shaped. You were born with tendencies, instincts, and expectations already embedded in you. You didn't invent your symbols. You remembered them, even if you've never seen them before. That's why a child dreams of a hero, why someone who's never read mythology draws a dragon, why the same shapes, the same figures, the same fears rise again and again in dreams, stories, and religions across time. The collective unconscious isn't filled with memories. It's filled with archetypes. Archetypes are the mind's oldest language. They are primordial images, not specific people or events, but patterns. Emotionally charged forms. Instinctive templates that shape how you see, how you feel, how you dream. They are not taught. They emerge. A great mother, a devouring beast, a sacred tree, a journey through darkness. These are not just cultural motifs. They are internal architecture. When you dream in archetypes. When you create, when you love, when you suffer, you are playing out ancient patterns embedded in your very being. And Jung believed, if you can recognize these patterns, you can begin to understand yourself. Not just who you are, but what you are made of. Some archetypes live inside all of us. Jung gave them names. Faces, roles in the internal drama of the psyche. The persona is the mask, the part of you shaped for others. It's not false, but it's incomplete. It's who you become to survive society, who you appear to be, the job title, the polite smile, the filtered version. It protects you, but it hides you too. Behind the mask is the shadow, the parts of yourself you don't want to admit, the anger, the envy, the desire you disown. But it's not just darkness, it's also potential. Strength you were told was wrong, fire you buried too deep. To confront the shadow is not to destroy it, but to reclaim it, to say, I am more than my persona, I am what I've feared. And then come the inner figures. Every man carries an anima, his inner feminine. Every woman carries an animus, her inner masculine. These aren't about gender roles. They're about psychic balance. The anima brings emotion, intuition, receptivity. The animus brings logic, strength, structure. They influence how you relate to the opposite sex. But more deeply, they shape your inner development. To reject them is to remain half-formed. To engage them is to grow. In your dreams, they appear as lovers, muses, critics. Sometimes they rescue you. Sometimes they challenge you. But always, they are there, waiting to be acknowledged. At the center of all these forces lies the self. Not the ego, not the mask, but the whole. The self is unity. It is the totality of who you are. Conscious and unconscious, light and dark, known and hidden. It is the still point at the center of the psyche. And Jung believed every human life is a journey toward it. He called this process individuation, the unfolding of the self through life. the slow reintegration of the psyche's divided parts. In childhood, there is a kind of original unity, a natural wholeness. But as we grow, we split. We separate into ego and shadow, persona and impulse, thought and feeling. Individuation is the path of return, not to innocence, but to conscious integration, to a unity that knows itself. Jung believed dreams were the map, not random, not just repressed wishes, but messages from the unconscious, layered and alive. He studied symbols across cultures. The snake, the mandala, the mountain, the sea. These weren't just personal memories. They were archetypal images, echoes of something deeper. To dream of a circle, he said, was to touch the self. The circle is wholeness. A mandala, a symbol of order emerging from chaos. Your mind doesn't give you answers. It gives you images, and through them, it speaks. But Jung didn't stop at interpretation. He asked, what if you could engage the unconscious directly? He developed a method called active imagination, not analyzing your dreams, but entering them, dialoguing with your inner figures, painting them, writing them, speaking with them as if they were real, because in a psychological sense, they are. You might meet the shadow. You might argue with your animus. You might follow a child through a forest that doesn't exist and find something you lost. This was not therapy in the traditional sense. It was a spiritual journey, a descent into the underworld of the psyche, and a return with something more whole. Jung also looked to myths, religions, and art. He believed they were repositories of archetypal knowledge. When people can't speak their unconscious directly, they express it through culture. That's why stories repeat, why myths echo, why ancient symbols feel familiar, even now. The hero's journey, the descent and return, the confrontation with the dragon, the sacrifice, the rebirth. These aren't just narrative tropes. They are psychic truths. Each myth is a mirror. Each god is an archetype. Each story is a path the unconscious knows. Jung's work was not a rejection of Freud. It was an expansion. Freud saw the unconscious as personal, sexual, repressed. Jung saw it as symbolic, spiritual, collective. Freud focused on pathology. Jung focused on integration, on meaning, on becoming. Freud said, "You are driven by hidden impulses." Jung said, "You are called by hidden images." One looks down into painful memories. The other looks down and through, to myth, to dream, to wholeness. You are not just your memories, not just your painful experiences, not just your thoughts. You are a mask and a shadow, a lover and a judge, a hero and a hidden hurt. And deep inside you, in the place words cannot reach, something ancient is watching. The collective unconscious doesn't speak. It sings. It paints. It whispers in dreams. And it waits for you to turn inward, to listen, to descend, and to become, at last, the whole self you were always meant to be. You followed the trail into the unconscious, through myths and dreams, through Freud's primal drives, through Jung's archetypal mirrors. But the story isn't complete. Not yet, because not everyone agreed with Freud. Not everyone saw the unconscious as a cauldron of taboo desire and repression. Some saw it differently, as a wound, as a fracture, as a direction, as a creative force. They walked alongside Freud, sometimes with him, often against him, but always toward the same mystery: what lies beneath the surface of the mind. Alfred Adler began as Freud's ally. He sat in the early meetings of the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society. He listened to the theories, debated the cases, explored the unconscious. But something didn't sit right. Freud had turned everything inward, into drives, instincts, childhood fantasies, into the past, into taboo desire, into conflict. But Adler asked, what if the unconscious isn't just about what happened to you? What if it's also about where you're going? Adler broke away. He founded individual psychology, a new school of thought, centered not on repression, but on direction. He still believed the unconscious was real, still believed people act without full awareness. But he shifted the focus from inner conflict to life goals, from hidden urges to social striving, from painful experience to teleology. You're not just a product of what you've buried. You're shaped by what you're aiming for, even if you don't realize it. Adler believed the deepest force inside you isn't lust. It's not guilt. It's inferiority. That sense sometimes sharp, sometimes subtle, that you're not enough, that you must become more, better, stronger, successful, seen. He called it the inferiority complex. Not a flaw, but a universal feeling, a push toward growth. Or if it turns inward, a cause of neurosis. You feel small, so you chase greatness. You feel weak, so you seek control. You feel unloved, so you try to be perfect. But it's not always conscious. Often, you're unaware of the real reasons behind your striving. You think you want success, but maybe you're just afraid of being forgotten. You think you want admiration, but maybe you're terrified of being unloved. This, Adler said, is the unconscious at work. But unlike Freud, Adler didn't dwell in the shadows. He saw the unconscious not as a dungeon, but as a compass. He believed every person has a creative self, a power to shape their personality, to choose a style of life, to pursue goals even in the face of pain. Where Freud looked backward, Adler looked forward. He emphasized conscious motivation. You're not just driven by past wounds. You're drawn by imagined futures, even if those futures are unconscious. And while Freud analyzed repression of desire, Adler looked at family dynamics, neglect, pampering, birth order, social comparison. He saw people not just as isolated minds, but as members of a community, always in relationship, always striving to belong, to matter. He called it Gemeinschaftsgefühl, community feeling, a sense of social interest, of being part of something larger than yourself. Mental health, for Adler, was not just about insight. It was about connection, contribution, purpose. You suffer, he said, when your striving becomes disconnected from others, when your goals become distorted, unrealistic, grandiose, or self-centered. The unconscious isn't just hiding shame. It's also hiding mistaken beliefs about success, value, and belonging. Pierre Janet walked a different path. He was French, more experimental, less theatrical. While Freud was building psychoanalysis, Janet was quietly laying foundations in psychology and neurology. And long before Freud made repression a household term, Janet was already describing the mind's hidden layers. He worked with patients suffering from hysteria, strange paralysis, fainting spells, voices, visions. But he wasn't content with labels. He looked deeper, and what he saw was fragmentation. Janet believed the mind was not a unified whole. He spoke of psychological automatism, the idea that many mental processes happen outside of awareness, running automatically, like background programs. He saw patients act, speak, and feel things they couldn't explain, memories they didn't recall, emotions that erupted without cause, voices that seemed to come from somewhere else. And he asked, what if overwhelming experience doesn't just repress memory? What if it splits it? Janet introduced the idea of dissociation. When the mind encounters overwhelming stress, something too much to bear, it doesn't repress. It fragments. The memory doesn't disappear. It breaks off, becomes a separate stream, a side channel of consciousness, a sub-personality. Part of you remembers, but another part lives as if it didn't happen, and both parts continue, parallel, disconnected, hidden. This wasn't just theory. Janet watched it happen. In patients who seemed to become different people, who switched between states, who lost time, who remembered things only under hypnosis. He saw how painful experience reshapes the mind, not just by burying, but by splintering. Where Freud saw repression as a barrier, Janet saw it as division, a break, a shattering. The unconscious, in Janet's view, isn't just a place of repressed wishes. It's a constellation of broken selves, of memories too difficult to integrate, of voices pushed to the edges of awareness. He was, in many ways, the precursor to modern trauma psychology, to ideas of dissociative identity, to the understanding that the unconscious isn't just deep, it's multiple. Others contributed too. Not all left such large footprints, but their ideas echo through time. Ernest Jones, Freud's biographer, expanded on the death drive, a force toward destruction, silence, return. Otto Rank, once Freud's protégé, explored the challenges of birth, the first separation, the first anxiety, the first unconscious fear. Wilhelm Reich saw the body as part of the unconscious. He believed emotional blockages manifest as physical tensions, that the unconscious is not just in the mind. It lives in the flesh. In the background stood William James, the American philosopher-psychologist. He didn't build systems. He asked questions. He wrote of the stream of consciousness, of mystical states, of subliminal thought. He suggested that consciousness is only a small part of mental life, that under the surface, the mind is teeming with activity, thoughts just below awareness, ideas not quite formed, feelings you can't name but feel anyway. He was fascinated by the margins, by dreams, drugs, religious experiences, trance. He opened the door to understanding consciousness not as a fixed point, but as a moving flow, with many layers. Henri Bergson, the French philosopher, took another path. He saw consciousness as duration, a continuous unfolding, not static, not mechanistic, but fluid, creative, alive. He believed the unconscious wasn't a storehouse of instincts, but a reservoir of memory, that everything you've ever experienced still exists within you, not as static files, but as living potential. He imagined the unconscious as a kind of psychic time, not a place, but a movement, a rhythm just outside of ordinary perception. Together, these thinkers expanded the story. They showed that the unconscious is not one thing. It is not only repressed desire, not only symbols and archetypes. It is also a striving for meaning, a fracture under stress, a voice split in two, a body that holds pain, a dream of wholeness, a direction toward future, a history of the soul. They taught that unconscious life is not just darkness, but complexity. You are not one person. You are many threads woven together, some conscious, some not, some chosen, some inherited, some broken, some still waiting to be named. So, if you've ever felt like a stranger to yourself, like you say things you don't mean, do things you can't explain, want things you shouldn't want, you're not broken. You're many. And those many voices, from Freud, from Jung, from Adler and Janet, from James and Bergson, they're all pointing to the same truth, that the unconscious isn't just beneath you, it's within you, around you, moving through you, every day. Not hidden, just waiting. You used to think you were the one behind the wheel, that you noticed the world, chose your actions, shaped your life consciously. But the science now whispers otherwise. It tells a quieter story, more intricate, more unsettling, more real. Because even in the light of modern neuroscience, the unconscious remains, not as myth, not as metaphor, but as function, as circuitry, as shadow work that the brain performs without asking your permission. You don't just think, you're being thought. Today, the unconscious mind has a new name. Cognitive science calls it unconscious cognition. Neuroscience maps it as activity in circuits, systems that never sleep, even when you believe you're awake. It is no longer confined to Freud's fantasies or Jung's symbols. It's embedded in your habits, your attention, your memory, your reflexes. It's the mind behind your mind. You don't remember learning how to walk, but your legs do. You don't remember the exact keys on the keyboard, but your fingers do. That is implicit memory. It lives beneath awareness, guiding action without narration. The cerebellum, the basal ganglia, these are not silent. They are scriptwriters of routine. They handle the motions, so your mind can wander elsewhere. Even in amnesia, the hand draws. Even in silence, the brain remembers. But the unconscious is not just memory. It's also priming. Exposure to one image, one word, one glance, and the rest of your mind shifts. A flash too fast to see, a face too faint to register, yet your judgment is changed. Your answers bend. Your behavior subtly turns. You don't realize it. You never notice. But the nudge has already happened. This is the power of a single cue, a subliminal signal, the silent bias of a word, and the ripples it sends through everything you think is choice. Priming tells us, awareness is not the beginning of thought. Often, it's the end. Your attention is no freer. It, too, is hijacked. Your eyes go to the danger. Your focus sticks to fear, and you don't know why. You are not choosing what you see. You are pulled toward it. Anxious minds scan for threat, even in calm rooms, even in neutral faces. That's attentional bias. You ignore what doesn't seem urgent. You miss the harmless, the safe, the ordinary. You are programmed not to see clearly, but to see survivably. It's not your fault. It's your wiring. A brain shaped by millennia of staying alive, not staying accurate. Your decisions, too, are largely automatic. You think you're weighing options, but the choice often comes before the weighing. Daniel Kahneman called it System 1, the fast brain, the intuitive leap, the snap judgment. It's not irrational. It's efficient. It uses heuristics, mental shortcuts, not because you're lazy, but because the world is too much. Only later, System 2 awakens, the slower, conscious mind, to justify what System 1 already decided. You think you're the author of your behavior, but most days, you're just editing after the fact. And beneath all this, emotion. Your amygdala can light up to a fearful face you don't even know you saw. Your heart races. Your palms sweat. But your mind stays in the dark. This is unconscious emotional processing. It happens before language, before reflection, before control. The amygdala acts first. The story comes later. You don't feel fear because you know. You feel fear before you know. So where does all this live? In the brain's silent networks. The basal ganglia automate habits. They run the scripts driving, brushing teeth, replying to the same email 10 times a day. You are on autopilot, and it works. The default mode network hums in the background when your mind wanders. The medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate. These regions are active when you're not. When you stare out the window, when you daydream, when you lie awake, adrift in thought. This is not nothing. This is ongoing cognition. Simulations, self-talk, memory reconsolidation. It is the unconscious still at work. Restless, recursive, relentless. Neuroscience now watches this all unfold. With EEG, with fMRI, with electrodes and algorithms, it sees readiness potentials fire before a person decides to move. It sees neurons light up before the intention arrives. What feels like free will may simply be the brain catching you up to yourself. Classic experiments have proven this again and again. Words flashed so quickly you can't read them still shape your next sentence. Amnesic patients like HM, who can't recall a task, still improve at it. Mirror drawing, word stem completion, skills that blossom in darkness. They don't remember learning, but their brains do. And then there's blind sight. Patients with visual cortex damage. They swear they see nothing. And yet, they guess the shapes correctly. They detect movement. There is sight, without seeing. Perception, without experience. So what is the unconscious now? It is not myth, not metaphor, not repression alone. It is a system, a process, a structure of awareness beneath awareness, a learned association, a synaptic trace, a flow of signals outside of introspection. It is implicit memory, priming, heuristics, attentional drag, emotional readiness, perceptual sensitivity, automatic skill. It is not hidden because it's mystical. It's hidden because your brain doesn't need to show it. To survive, it just needs to work. But something deeper still flickers at the edge of science. Flow states, that eerie, immersive sensation of effortlessness. You act, but do not try. You perform, but do not narrate. Artists know it. Athletes, surgeons, musicians. Moments where you vanish, and only motion remains. Your prefrontal cortex quiets. The default mode switches off. Basal ganglia and midbrain ramp up. Executive systems light the path, and the self disappears. In that moment, You are pure unconscious action, flawless, focused, free. Meditation taps similar states. Stillness, no thought, no self-reference. The default mode dissolves. Salience and attention networks synchronize. A brain once filled with noise becomes a tuning fork. Even 1 month of mindfulness can rewire the mind's inner circuits. Connectivity shifts. Balance emerges. In those quiet moments, unconscious patterns are not silenced. They are revealed, not as ghosts, but as signals, rhythms, biology with mystery still intact, and lasting pain. It too etches itself beneath awareness, in flashbacks, in smells, in tightness of breath. The hippocampus fails, but the body remembers. Sound becomes trigger, touch becomes alarm. Emotion rides the nerves like electricity, and the past returns, not as memory, but as sensation. This is the implicit memory of pain, the unconscious as wound, the mind as map of unspoken history. So what does modern science believe? That the unconscious is not fiction, not fantasy, not a dusty relic of Viennese theory. It is the architecture of mind, the plumbing of perception, the invisible machinery behind experience. It guides you before you know, protects you before you ask, shapes you before you speak. And the more we study, the more we realize the conscious mind is a narrow window. The unconscious is the house. You live in that house. Even if you never see every room, the legacy survives. Freud's dreams, Jung's symbols, Adler's goals, Janet's fragments, they echo through EEG wires, through neural scans, through behavior patterns and decision biases. But now, they speak with new language, cognitive models, neural maps, data points, and yet, the question remains the same. What moves you when you're not watching? Because behind your choices, behind your words, behind your gaze, is a mind that has never stopped working. A self you've never fully met. A whisper beneath thought. A motion beneath control. A presence that dreams you even as you dream. You are not one mind. You are a shifting spectrum of states. You wake, you sleep, you forget, you act. And all the while, something deeper is guiding you without your knowing. Because the unconscious is not one hidden chamber. It is an ever-changing flow, a cycle of silences and awakenings. Sometimes still, sometimes sharp, sometimes entirely invisible. Let's step into the twilight, where the conscious flickers and the unconscious takes over. Sleep is the most familiar unknown. You do it every night, but you don't know how. You close your eyes, the world falls away, your muscles sink, your thoughts dissolve. And your brain, your most active organ, begins its nightly metamorphosis. It starts with non-REM sleep, slow wave, deep, dreamless. Your thalamus gates off sensory input. The cortex begins to pulse in synchrony, low frequency, high amplitude waves. Metabolism drops. Connectivity fades. The mind becomes still, but not for long. REM sleep arrives in surges, paradoxical sleep. Your cortex reactivates, almost like waking. Dreams begin. Images surge, faces twist, narratives bloom. But your body paralyzed, your muscles frozen by brainstem inhibition. Your brain is awake, your body is asleep. You are inside the dream, unable to move yet fully engaged. This cycle repeats through the night. Non-REM clearing, REM rebuilding. A nightly rhythm of forgetting and remaking the self. Anesthesia is a deeper fall. Not sleep, not rest, not dreaming. It is a manufactured blackout, a deliberate shutdown of the self. Anesthetics hijack your brain's arousal systems. GABA floods the cortex, silencing neurons. The thalamus stops talking to the cortex. No input, no processing, no awareness. Some agents mimic deep sleep. Others, like certain dissociative agents, disconnect perception entirely. You are disconnected from pain, from time, from identity. There is no narrative, no dreaming, just the absence of being. And when you wake, it feels like nothing ever happened. That's the point. A surgical pause, a borrowed oblivion. Then comes hypnosis, not a disappearance, but a redirection. You sit, you breathe, a voice speaks, and something shifts. You are not asleep, you are not unconscious. You are intensely focused, but strangely open, highly suggestible, receptive. The brain reflects this shift. The anterior cingulate, your attention filter, lights up. Your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex engages. And the default mode, your narrative voice, dims. The critical voice steps aside. The gates open. Suggestions become actions. Ideas feel real. Pain fades. Memory alters. And you remain aware, but differently. In highly hypnotizable individuals, the architecture of attention changes. They surrender without losing control. They reshape their experience, not because they're fooled, but because the unconscious is listening. Meditation travels a parallel path, but the voice here is yours. You sit still. You breathe. You witness. At first, it's noisy. The mind wanders, chases thoughts, fights the stillness. But then the shift, the default mode network, the wandering, self-referential center, begins to quiet. Activity moves from inner commentary to present moment awareness. The salience network steps in tracking breath, sound, body. Over time, with practice, networks synchronize. DMN, salience, executive control, once scattered, now coordinated. Meditators show stronger integration, more resilience, more access to states of focus without tension. The unconscious is not suppressed here. It's brought into balance, but dissociation is balance torn apart. It's not chosen, it's not cultivated. It happens when the mind fractures under pressure. In overwhelming experience, the unbearable, the unspeakable. You do not collapse. You split. You separate thought from feeling, body from awareness, memory from self. You float above, detached, watching, unfeeling. This is depersonalization, derealization. The body moves, but you are not in it. Neuroimaging shows prefrontal areas clamping down on the limbic system. Emotion is silenced. Connection is severed. Dissociation is not failure. It is protection. But it comes at a cost. You survive by forgetting, but the forgetting becomes a prison. You live, but not as a whole. Somewhere between sleep and waking, you find lucid dreaming. You are asleep, but aware that you are dreaming. It begins with a flicker, a moment of recognition. This can't be real. And then clarity. You steer the dream. You ask questions. You fly. The brain confirms this shift. In frequent lucid dreamers, the anterior prefrontal cortex, normally silent in REM, lights up. The parietal regions re-engage. Metacognition returns. Self-awareness re-enters the dream. Lucid dreams are not fantasies. They are laboratory states where waking consciousness meets unconscious creation. You can speak to your symbols, test your fears, train your mind. and all while sleeping. Then comes the mystery of automaticity. You drive, you type, you speak a phrase you've said 1,000 times. Where were you? Not unconscious, not fully aware. This is autopilot. Procedural memory running the show. The basal ganglia and cerebellum handle it, all practiced routines, flowing beneath the cortex. The conscious mind takes a back seat. The unconscious executes. It is efficient, effortless, unnoticed, until something breaks the pattern, and you wonder, who was I, just now? And finally flow, that elusive, sacred state where effort vanishes, where time collapses, where self dissolves. You are skiing down a slope, drawing for hours, playing a solo, operating in crisis, and you do not think. You are the action. This is flow. It's not just poetic, it's physiological. The brain lights up in new ways. Salience networks surge. Motor systems fire. The default mode dims. You are not narrating the experience. You are the experience. Studies show that flow states require a match, challenge, and skill. Too easy, and you're bored. Too hard, and you're anxious. But just right, and you fall in. Even the locus coeruleus, tied to norepinephrine release, operates in an optimal range. Not too high, not too low. This isn't just peak performance. It's a peak state, and it comes from letting go. You disappear and become more yourself than ever. So what does all this tell you? That consciousness is not a switch. It is a spectrum. You drift. You split. You lose and regain the self in countless ways. Sleep, anesthesia, hypnosis, meditation, dissociation, lucidity, flow. Each is a doorway. Each reveals a new architecture of mind. The unconscious is not asleep. It is not dumb. It is not passive. It guides, protects, creates, masters. It keeps you alive while you're dreaming. It makes art when the critic is silent. It preserves memory through silence. And it rescues the self when the world becomes too much. You are not merely conscious. You are a river of states, sometimes deep, sometimes clear, sometimes hidden even from yourself, but never still. This is the real unconscious. Not a basement, not a monster, not a myth, but a language your body speaks, a wisdom your waking mind forgets, a mirror, not of thoughts, but of being. And in your quietest moments, you feel it, moving under everything you are. You can forget something and still feel it. You don't remember the moment, but your breath shortens, your stomach tightens, your chest locks, and you don't know why. You say, "I'm fine," but your body tells a different story. This is the mark of deep pain. Not always remembered, but never gone. Pain lives in the body before it lives in the mind. Not just as memory, but as a pattern, a reflex, a readiness. You were overwhelmed. And in that moment, your brain encoded more than a scene. It encoded fear, sound, smell, skin temperature, the flash of light, the tone of a voice. And these fragments became embedded, not as narrative, but as sensation. Modern neuroscience agrees. The hippocampus, the brain's memory librarian, is often shut down during extreme stress. Too much stress, too much adrenaline, and the system freezes. Instead, the amygdala takes over. It encodes raw emotional data, snapshots, explosions of affect. No words, no order, just reaction. Later, when triggered, the memory doesn't return as story. It returns as state. You feel the fear, the rage, the helplessness, but you can't place it. This is not forgetting. This is implicit memory, the kind that bypasses thought. In PTSD, this becomes a haunting rhythm, moments of blankness, and moments of unbearable clarity, the silence of amnesia, the intensity of flashbacks. As von der Kolk describes, intense pain creates both amnesias and hypomnesias. You might not remember the day, but you'll relive the scream. You'll hear the sound again and collapse. The smell of smoke, the creak of a door, the specific color of a hallway. Triggers, not in your mind, but in your nervous system. The body keeps the score. Pain isn't only a memory, it's a pattern of reactivity, of vigilance, of discomfort without context. You scan the room for danger. You flinch at touch. You wake in the night with your heart racing. And no matter how often you're told you're safe, your unconscious isn't so sure. Because survival imprints deeply, and your nervous system doesn't deal in logic. It deals in alarms. This is the hidden architecture of emotional memory. Your brain's fear pathways, amygdala, striatum, midbrain, remain on guard. Normally, the prefrontal cortex can regulate them, soothe the signals, rationalize the reaction, but overwhelming stress dulls that bridge. Stress hormones flood the system. The prefrontal cortex loses grip. The alarms keep ringing. You live in a body that feels under siege, even when nothing is wrong, and you start to wonder, am I broken? But you're not. You're remembering, just not in words. Dissociation enters when the pain is too much. You detach, not because you want to, but because you have to. You leave the body. You float above. You watch yourself from outside. You feel like a ghost, a spectator, not real. This isn't fantasy. It's neurological defense. Your mind fragments the unbearable, keeps parts hidden, compartmentalized. Your narrative self checks out, but the unconscious records everything. Later, you feel split. Parts of you know, parts of you don't. This isn't weakness. It's protection. It's the brain saving itself. Sometimes, pain returns without memory. You burst into tears during a movie. You panic when someone raises their voice. You lash out and then feel shame. But you can't trace it. You can't explain it. These are emotional flashbacks. Intense affect. Unattached to narrative. No beginning. No end. Just pure feeling. Your conscious mind asks, what's wrong? But the unconscious already knows. To manage this, the psyche uses defenses. Freud called them defense mechanisms, unconscious strategies to avoid what's too painful to face. They are not choices. They are reflexes. They operate beneath awareness, twisting, bending, burying, so you can keep going. Repression is the cornerstone. You bury the thought, the memory, the truth. It doesn't disappear, but it goes underground. You live with symptoms, phobias, anxieties, inexplicable sadness. But the cause is sealed. This is the mind's attempt to protect you from itself. But repression is not deletion. It's storage, without access. Denial is its cousin. The event happened. The facts are visible. But your mind says, number. You look at the bank account, the test result, the bruises, and say, this isn't real. It's not lying. It's self-preservation. Denial suspends reality, not forever, but long enough for you to survive it. Projection pushes it outward. You feel anger, guilt, desire, fear, but you can't own it. So you see it in others. You accuse. You attack. You imagine enemies, not because they're real, but because it's safer than facing your own feelings. The unconscious says, if I can't feel this, someone else must. Sublimation is the alchemy. You take rage and turn it into art, aggression into sport, desire into music, loss into healing. This is the mind transforming the unacceptable into something socially powerful. The impulse isn't removed. It's redirected, disguised, elevated, and in that way, you survive without collapsing. There are others. Displacement, shifting your anger from your boss to your partner. Rationalization, dressing wounds in logic. Isolation of affect, remembering the event, but not the emotion. Each one is a doorway the unconscious builds. To shield you from a fire it doesn't know how to put out. But what about forgotten pain? The repressed memory, once buried, now recovered? This idea is deeply debated. Psychodynamic theory says, yes, pain can be too overwhelming to hold, and so it hides. And later in therapy, in dreams, in life it may surface. But cognitive science says, be careful, because memory is not perfect. It is reconstructive, malleable, suggestible. Elizabeth Loftus changed the conversation. In lab experiments, she showed how easy it is to implant false memories, to make people believe they were lost in a mall, attacked by an animal, harmed when they weren't, not because they were weak, but because memory is social. It's a negotiation between impression, suggestion, and belief. Recovered memories may be true, but they must be tested, validated, gently held, because false memories can feel just as real, and the unconscious doesn't always know the difference. Neuroscience now studies suppression directly. In the think, no-think paradigm, people are trained to forget on purpose. They're shown a word pair, then told, do not think of the second word. Over time, brain scans show changes. The prefrontal cortex exerts control. The hippocampus goes quiet. Memory is not erased, but access is blocked. This is not repression, as Freud imagined. It's conscious inhibition. But it shows the power of intention to reshape what rises and what stays buried. So what's the truth about pain and memory? The unconscious does store distress, but not always in story. Sometimes in sound, sometimes in skin, sometimes in behaviors you can't explain. It defends itself with forgetting, with distortion, with silence, and sometimes with stories that were never real. But all of it is part of the same effort, to protect you, to preserve you, to keep going. You carry wounds you don't remember, reactions you can't trace, feelings you can't explain, fears that don't match the facts. That's not madness. It's memory, without awareness, emotion, without language, history, without context, and the unconscious, ever faithful, keeps it all alive, not to torment you, but to prepare you, to keep you alert to what once hurt you, even if that hurt is long gone. You are not broken. You are encoded. You are a library of resilience, some of which has no words. But every day, you remember in breath, in reflex, in silence, and slowly, you heal. You've searched for the unconscious in science, in neurons, in dreams, in deep pain, in silence. But before there were brain scans, before there were models, there were metaphors, because the mind has always needed images to describe what it could not see. And across time, across cultures, people spoke in symbols to make sense of the darkness beneath their own thoughts. Freud gave you the iceberg, a white peak above water. visible, conscious, clear. But below, a massive frozen structure, unseen, immense, dangerous. The conscious self, he said, is just the tip. Everything else, your instincts, memories, impulses, fears, lie beneath. Not gone, just submerged. You navigate with only part of the map. Jung gave you the shadow, not water, but darkness. The unconscious, he said, is the part of you you refuse to see. Your rejected self, the thoughts that shame you, the drives that scare you. It follows you, whispers in your ear, appears in your dreams. It is not evil, but it is everything you've disowned. To integrate the shadow is to become whole. To reject it is to be haunted by it. Others saw the unconscious as an ocean, endless, uncharted, deep. Your conscious mind is a boat, drifting on currents it cannot name. You feel the pull, you see the waves, but the source remains hidden. You fear drowning, but also crave immersion. Some called it the puppet master. You act, you speak, you choose, but are you pulling the strings? Or are you being moved by a hand you cannot see? Desire, habit, painful memory, experience. Not commands, but impulses, shaping every move. Others imagined the mind as a mountain, at the peak consciousness, high, exposed, narrow, below vastness, rock, ice, depth. The ego stands in the sun, but the unconscious is the entire structure beneath it. You think you live at the top, but everything that supports you is below. Metaphors aren't science, but they carry truth. They capture the intuition that you are more than what you can think about, that the mind is not transparent, that there are rooms with no lights, hallways with no windows, memories with no language, and cultures across the world have known this long before psychology had a name. In the East, the path wasn't to conquer the unconscious. It was to surrender. Taoism speaks of wu-wei, effortless action, to do without doing, to let the deep knowing move through you, without interference. Don't push the river, they say. Flow with it. The unconscious is not to be dissected. It is to be followed, trusted, aligned. You stop grasping. You let go. And suddenly, you act with wisdom beyond thought. Zen speaks of non-thinking. Mu-jin, a mind that is empty of striving, but full of clarity. You sit, breathe, and observe the thoughts, not as truths, but as passing clouds. You detach, not from life, but from illusion. The goal is not control. It is presence, the dissolution of self into the now, not in fragments, but in wholeness. Yoga speaks of samadhi, union, the dropping of ego, the merging of individual consciousness with the universal. It is not a trance. It is not escape. It is the opposite. Full immersion, perfect alignment. The conscious mind quiets, and the deeper self, the unconscious self, rises not as chaos, but as awareness, not a threat, but a return. Indigenous traditions walk different paths, but arrive at the same truth. The unconscious is not an enemy. It is a portal. Shamans around the world enter trance. Through drums, through chants, through breath, through plants. They leave the ordinary world, journey through inner landscapes, speak to ancestors, heal souls. This is not metaphor to them. It is medicine. They do not analyze dreams. They walk through them. They retrieve what was lost. They return with wisdom. Vision quests. You fast. You isolate. You wait. The conscious mind begins to fade. And then, a vision, a symbol, a message. From inside, from the world. Does it matter? The insight comes. The unconscious speaks. And you are changed. Soul retrieval. When pain splinters a person, they say, a part of the soul is lost. Not dead, just hidden. The shaman enters trance, finds the fragment, brings it home. Western therapists call this integration. Eastern mystics call it union. Indigenous healers call it return. Different names, same path. Across cultures, altered states are not feared. They are cultivated. Dreams, trance, ecstasy, ritual, not symptoms, but portals, not madness, but method. Because humans have always known the self is deeper than thought, and healing often comes when you stop trying to control the process. Even our literature tells us, in stories, the hero doesn't climb to the light. They descend into caves, into underworlds, into forests at night. There they meet the shadow, face their fear, discover forgotten truths, and only then return, changed. This is not a plot device. It is a psychic truth. The unconscious is not just beneath you. It is within the story of becoming. And so you learn. You are not a thinker. You are a vessel. You do not control the mind. You listen to it. Your greatest insights often arise when you stop striving. When you dance, pray, meditate, dream. Your metaphors reveal your beliefs. That not everything must be explained. That some things must be felt, experienced, lived. Science scans the brain, measures activation, maps circuits. But still, there is room for metaphor, for poetry, for myth, because what the unconscious is may always be bigger than what we can say. But we can see it reflected in oceans, in icebergs, in shadows, in rivers that move without effort, in rituals that reshape the soul, and in the stillness that follows surrender. You are not just neurons. You are narrative. Not just cortex, but culture. Not just circuits, but symbols. You dream in myths. You speak in metaphors. You move through states of being older than language. And in every image, the mind remembers itself. The unconscious is not a new idea, but the way we've understood it, that has changed. Again and again. From caves to couches. From shadows to circuits. From myth to MRI. This is not just the story of a concept. It is the story of how humanity came to see itself more clearly and more humbly, because to study the unconscious is to admit we are not fully in control. We never were. It begins in metaphor. Before science, before psychology, there were stories. Plato gave us the cave. You sit in the dark, watching shadows on the wall, believing them to be reality. Behind you, the fire. Outside, the sun. You do not see the truth. You see the projection. And the journey is to turn, to leave the shadows, to see the source, to awaken. Was this allegory about truth, about knowledge, or was it our first description of unconscious life? The blind routine, the hidden cause, the awakening that feels like confusion before it feels like clarity. For centuries, dreams were not pathology. They were prophecy, divine messages, symbols from the gods. You slept, you saw, and you listened. In temples, in caves, in silence. The unconscious wasn't denied. It was revered. Not disorder, but depth. Not malfunction, but mystery. Then came science. And with it, psychology. In the late 1800s, the mind became something you could study. Not just ponder, but measure. Out of that moment rose one of the most consequential thinkers in human history, Sigmund Freud. Freud gave the unconscious form, not spirit, not metaphor, but structure. In 1900, the interpretation of dreams changed everything. The unconscious, he said, is a repository of repressed memories, desires, wounds. It is not passive. It is active. It moves in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in symptoms, in silence. You are not fully aware of yourself, but your behaviors are echoes of what you've pushed away. Freud offered a topography: conscious, preconscious, unconscious, and later a structure: id, ego, superego. Conflict was inevitable. Desire clashed with morality. Instinct clashed with society. And the unconscious held the fallout. Freud's influence was immense. He shaped therapy, language, culture. He was praised, criticized, worshipped, dismissed, but he opened the door, and others would walk through it, carrying their own ideas. Carl Jung stood beside Freud until he didn't. At first, they collaborated. They agreed. There is more to the mind than thought. But Jung saw something Freud didn't. A deeper layer, a collective unconscious. Not just personal repression, but inherited imagery, archetypes, dreams older than the individual. They split in 1913. And Jung went his own way, toward symbols, shadow, individuation. He said, the unconscious is not just conflict, it is also the key to becoming whole. But not everyone agreed that inner life mattered. In the same year Jung departed, a new voice rose: John B. Watson. He launched behaviorism, and with it a new dogma: only behavior can be studied. If you can't see it, measure it, or replicate it, ignore it. Thoughts, feelings, unconscious drives, irrelevant. Psychology became the study of input and output, stimulus and response, training and conditioning. B.F. Skinner carried the torch. The mind, he said, is a black box. Open it at your peril. For decades, Freud was out. Psychoanalysis was labeled unscientific, too abstract, too speculative. Behavior ruled, and for a while, it worked. Rats pressed levers. Humans avoided shocks. Fears were extinguished. But something was missing: the mind. In the 1950s and 60s, a new revolution stirred. Not against Freud, not for Skinner, but toward something different: cognition. Ulrich Neisser coined cognitive psychology in 1967. The mind returned, but this time as an information processor, not myth, not metaphor, but system. Memory, attention, language, pattern recognition, all could be modeled, studied, tested. Even the unconscious, reframed. No longer a cauldron of repression, now a set of mechanisms: priming, implicit memory, cognitive bias, unconscious processing. But with data, therapy evolved alongside. Aaron Beck, Albert Ellis, they saw thoughts, even distorted ones, as levers. They created cognitive therapy, and later, CBT, not to dig into the unconscious, but to notice patterns, question them, reshape them. But still, unconscious forces remained. Habits, beliefs, automatic interpretations. The unconscious had returned, not as myth, but as method. Meanwhile, other voices echoed Freud and Jung in softer tones. Abraham Maslow, in 1954, spoke of motivation. Not just fear, but growth, self-actualization, a quiet nod to deeper forces, driving us beyond survival. Humanistic psychology emphasized experience, emotion, meaning. The unconscious wasn't dissected, it was honored. And then the brain entered the conversation. The late 20th century saw the rise of neuroscience, fMRI, EEG, PET scans. The black box began to light up. Suddenly, theories became patterns. Ideas became images. Behavior became circuits. The unconscious, it was there. Amygdala reactivity in deep stress. Hippocampal suppression during distress. Prefrontal inhibition in memory suppression. You could see fear, watch forgetting, track habits. Social neuroscience expanded the frame. Biases, emotions, instant judgments. You meet a stranger, your amygdala fires, your cortex justifies later. Unconscious decision-making, now visible, traceable, predictable, not hidden in dreams, but operating in milliseconds. Therapy became eclectic, no longer one school, but many voices. Psychodynamic therapy still addressed unconscious conflict. Somatic therapy acknowledged pain in the body. CBT addressed cognitive distortions. Mindfulness brought in Eastern silence. Van der Kolk reminded us, the body keeps the score. Freud said, early pain shapes the self. Jung said, symbols heal what words cannot. And neuroscience said, here's the circuit. So where are we now? The unconscious is real, but it is not what we once thought. It is not a mystical chamber, not a hidden theater, not a storm of urges and symbols alone. It is implicit memory, heuristics, habits, emotional conditioning, neural inhibition, cultural patterning, somatic echoes. It is real and measurable, but still, part mystery. You are not the same as your thoughts. You are deeper, earlier, older. The unconscious is not just a relic. It is a process, a movement beneath attention, a shaping of perception, a coloring of behavior. You are not one story. You are layers of history, biological, cultural, personal. You carry Freud's repression, Jung's shadow, Skinner's conditioning, Beck's cognition, Maslow's hunger, Van der Kolk's warning, your grandmother's silence, your own unspoken memory. This is the evolution of thought. From cave to cortex, from dreams to data, from symbols to synapses. Each generation brings a metaphor, each model a map, none complete, all pointing. And still, you wonder, who is thinking when I'm not? Who is choosing when I feel passive? Who is remembering when I've forgotten? The answer shifts, but the search continues, because the unconscious is not behind you. It is beside you, within you, ahead of you, It is the part of you, still becoming. And now, you know, you've wandered through myth and memory, science and silence, trauma, trance, and thought. You've seen the unconscious not as a shadow to fear, but as a mirror, reflecting what you've always carried, but never quite named. You are not broken. You are layered. You are not just awake. You are unfolding. And if this journey stirred something in you, a question, a memory, a stillness, let it echo. And when you're ready, there are more stories waiting. So if you felt seen, if you felt soothed, or simply curious, subscribe, like, share this with someone who dreams as deeply as you do. Mental Cipher will be here every night to whisper the truths you forgot you remembered.